What is up, everyone? Today we're talking about Constellation and the DAG token. Now, this is something I've actually held for quite a while, but I recently decided to do a deep dive into the ecosystem to learn more about it. And I have to say, this is one of the most interesting things I've researched in crypto for a long time. Now, in a couple of recent videos, I mentioned that I've been acquiring more DAG over the last few weeks. And after this video, you will definitely see why. So let's get into it. So today we're going over the Constellation Network and the DAG token in full. We'll cover what it is, what problems it solves, the tokenomics, the unique utility and value capture mechanisms of the DAG token. And then at the end of the video, we're going to look at 5 real-world use cases that are being implemented right now by real companies disrupting billion-dollar industries, and that includes the US government. Now, Constellation Network is a layer 0 protocol with infinite scalability and 0 fees. Layer 0 means that it sits beneath traditional layer 1s such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, Avalanche, etc., but it can interoperate and interact with any of them. Constellation Network can also interact with any system or any device in the world that uses data of any kind, either inside or outside of crypto. Now that's a huge statement because it means that Constellation can work with any legacy system or device from the real world. And that's pretty mind-blowing and opens up all kinds of use cases that haven't been possible before with the blockchains or DLT systems that we're all used to, especially since most of them use a transaction fee model, which can get real expensive, real fast when you're doing high volumes, even if the transaction costs look very low per transaction on the surface. And this is one key area where Constellation Network is different to the blockchains that we're all used to. See, Constellation is technically not a blockchain, it's a DAG or Directed Acyclic Graph. And you can basically think of this as the next evolution of blockchain technology that's both much faster and much more scalable. Now, without getting into too many of the technicalities about how it actually works, the DAG structure or the hypergraph allows Constellation to tackle some of the biggest issues we see with blockchains. That's going to be speed, scalability, and costs. Now, we're all used to seeing how traditional blockchains can get overwhelmed when they have huge spikes in transaction volumes out of nowhere, and even the layer 2s, they have their limits too. Now, as we'll see later on in this video, for the kind of use cases that Constellation Network is targeting, the performance issues we're used to with regular blockchains like Ethereum, they're just not going to cut it. That is not going to be acceptable. They're basically building a kind of new internet for big data that will eventually be able to handle all of the data produced in the world in every industry. So obviously, if that's your goal, the DLT technology that you're using, it needs to be built from the ground up from day one to be able to scale infinitely and effortlessly. Now, one of the reasons that the hypergraph can scale so well is that all of the nodes in the network, they can all be working on processing different transactions at one time and processing them concurrently. So there's no waiting in line, waiting for earlier transactions to be processed before yours can go through like you would see with a traditional blockchain. Also, any data that enters the hypergraph network, before it enters, it's actually validated at source by the nodes without the need for any oracles. And then as it travels through the network, it's continuously being validated at each point on its journey. And this means that the network is able to promise extremely high levels of security, the kind of security that will be needed for government and military applications. All of the nodes on the hypergraph are responsible for monitoring their neighbors, which are the other nodes closest to them. Basically, they're always watching each other to make sure that each node is doing accurate work and is being honest. Now this forms the custom consensus that Constellation built for the hypergraph, and it's called Proof of Reputable Observation, or PRO. And this means that the network doesn't need to use proof of work, it doesn't even need to use proof of stake, and as a result, the network is highly energy efficient compared to regular blockchains, and the nodes require very little power to run. Some of them, the light nodes, can even be run on a cell phone. Now, one thing I find super intriguing about the hypergraph network and the way it scales horizontally is that it actually gets faster with more bandwidth and more TPS the more it's used. So I'll say that again, the more you use it, the faster the network gets, instead of getting slower and clogged up like a regular blockchain. Later in the video, we'll also see how DAG stakers, holders, and node runners directly benefit from this as well, because the value capture for the DAG token is very impressive, and the more the network is used, the more value the DAG token absorbs. Now, the second key difference between Constellation Network's hypergraph and a regular blockchain is the idea of state channels. Now, I've seen it said that you can think of state channels as kind of an evolution of smart contracts, but really what they are is they are entire autonomous businesses built on the hypergraph. State channels are their own independent DAG networks inside the hypergraph for specific business or use cases, and the overall structure allows for an unlimited number of state channels. And this fact, combined with the technology allowing hypergraph to validate any data at source before it enters the network without the use of oracles, mean that state channels are much better suited for the largest real-world applications that have huge transaction volumes, the kind of business use cases that will just crush any particular blockchain just because of the transaction volume alone, let alone not being able to deal with all the different data types. Now, every state channel is completely customizable out of the box, so whatever the business wants to do in terms of the data it's going to work with. Obviously, each state channel is also interoperable too, so everything on the hypergraph can talk to each other, and they can also mint their own layer 0 tokens, just like on Ethereum you can mint an ERC20 token. So now we've taken a basic look at what the Constellation Network is and some of the problems it's trying to solve. Now I want to look at the tokenomics and the use case for the DAG token. It has some really unique value capture mechanisms and some impressive opportunities for passive income, which I really want to get into. So if you hold DAG, thinking of buying DAG, or are just wondering what the hell the DAG token does, you're going to want to understand this. So the tokenomics for DAG really are unique and unlike anything else I've seen in crypto. And strong tokenomics are one of the key things I look for in my personal investment decisions. That's why I have things like Luna or Thorchain as some of my biggest positions. And it's also why I've been heavily accumulating DAG over the last few weeks. Now, the tokenomics for DAG are based on a concept called generative economics, which is designed in a way that will allow for every holder and every participant in the Constellation ecosystem to benefit as the network sees more and more usage. Now, I appreciate that sounds a little bit woolly, but stick with me here because DAG's value capture mechanisms are seriously legit, and I want to explain how they work. Basically, the token has been set up in a way that will allow it to capture the value of all of the data and all of the activity on the network by all participants, all L0 tokens, and all state channels. Really, at the highest level, what DAG represents is tokenized throughput or bandwidth on the network. It's really needed in some way or another for absolutely everything that you can do on the hypergraph. And remember, it's supply capped. So as the usage of the network goes up and up, DAG is designed to capture that, and you'll struggle to find any other crypto that has such a close tie between the network usage and the value capture of the token. So if you think of a stock index and how the index itself captures the value of all of the companies in the index, DAG is somewhat similar in terms of how it works, except that it has massive utility for anyone that wants to do anything on the hypergraph. The Constellation website says this about the DAG token. DAG is the financial state channel of the Constellation Network. It allows for seamless exchange and interaction between the various state channels and nodes that make up the network. DAG binds the network components together so that they relate to one another. But let's get more specific in terms of the actual day-to-day use cases for the DAG token that we can actually relate to. These are the primary use cases for DAG. Firstly, zero-fee transactions on the Hypergraph are made possible either by holding DAG or running a node. The more DAG an entity holds or the more nodes they run, the more zero-fee throughput they have access to. Now, if a state channel exceeds their threshold of zero-fee transactions, they can also use DAG to pay for additional transactions. Every new layer 0 token that's created requires DAG to be locked up, as does the creation of every new state channel. DAG is needed for interoperability with other blockchains, but also just for basic throughput and transmission of data across the Hypergraph and running any kind of consensus on data. So really, anything you do on the network requires DAG in some way or another. And remember, it has a capped supply. It's also worth noting that the DAG required by state channels to do everything they need to do on the Hypergraph is required on an ongoing basis. It's not just at the point of a transaction to pay for the transaction, or at the point you mint an L0 token or create a new state channel. It's long-term locking up of DAG on a network that is infinitely scalable, zero fee, with a hard supply cap on the token. So all this leads me to believe that as the network usage grows, there is a lot of potential for price appreciation in the DAG token with all of the value capture mechanisms that they have. But what we haven't touched on yet are the passive income opportunities, which honestly are really impressive. They're one of the things I'm most excited about as an investor in Constellation Network. And this project really does have everything that I look for in a long-term, stable passive income opportunity that is sustainable. Now, if we look at the Tokenomics 2.0 paper, we can see that in order to secure, validate, and stream large quantities of data for free, state channels have 3 options. And these are, number 1, staking DAG to grant increased access to network utility, which is TPS or bandwidth. Number 2, spinning up or purchasing existing DAG nodes. Or 3, a combination of 1 and 2. Now, if we focus on option number 1 here, which is locking more liquidity into a state channel, we know from the tokenomics paper that the more liquidity that is locked up, the higher the TPS and the higher the bandwidth the state channel can facilitate for free. Now, for me, this looks to be huge in terms of passive income opportunities for DAG holders. And the reason is that state channels will be competing with each other to incentivize holders to put liquidity in their state channels versus the competitors. And this is where things get interesting for me, because the paper lays out a couple of different strategies that state channel business could use to incentivize users to point their liquidity into their state channel. And that includes incentivizing them with their own layer 0 tokens, incentivizing them with DAG, or even incentivizing them with other coins such as Bitcoin, Ethereum, or stable coins. So it looks like each individual state channel could end up becoming its own independent rewards pool, waiting to incentivize DAG holders, all without increasing the supply of the DAG token. This could also lead to a healthy secondary market for the trading of DAG nodes. So if you have a node that has a good pro score and good history, we could have a situation where state channels need additional throughput on the network. They need it fast, they need it reliably. So they'll be willing to pay a premium for nodes that have a good history and a good standing on the network. So we've taken a brief look at both opportunities for capital appreciation with the DAG token, but also passive income too. But so far, this has been fairly conceptual. So now what I want to do is look at some of my favorite real world use cases for Constellation Network and the Hypergraph, so you can see what's running right now, what's coming in the future, and how this actually translates to people using the Hypergraph. Now, one of the most exciting things for me about Constellation Network and the ecosystem is the huge variety of use cases that it makes possible that are honestly just not possible with any other blockchain. And one thing you'll notice is that the state channel businesses building on the Hypergraph, they're not building copy and paste yield farms or scrappy NFT projects or anything like that. They're working on solving huge problems in the real world in billion-dollar industries. So here are 5 of my favorite use cases on the Hypergraph that are being worked on right now. Now, firstly, we are starting off with the biggest, which is the United States Department of Defense. You might have heard of them. They've been working publicly with Constellation Network now for over 2 years. Now, I can't think of any entity on the planet who is likely to be more concerned with the security of their data than the US military, specifically the US Air Force in this case. So for me, this is basically the biggest vote of confidence you could ever ask for, that this technology is legit and does what it says it does. It's hard to imagine the level of due diligence that must have been required for this deal to move forward, or honestly to think of any deal bigger than this in crypto today. And in terms of the scope of the project, it's described as end-to-end data security using blockchain encryption and hosting decentralization. Now, if you remember at the start of the video, we discussed how Constellation Network can work with any data from any legacy system. This was key to them securing the DOD contract, as it meant that none of the legacy systems needed to be changed in order to work with the Hypergraph. So this is an actual statement from one of the DOD press releases, which is kind of crazy to me that they're even saying this publicly. The federal government can rely on Constellation to use its native currency DAG to secure bandwidth on the network. This multi-domain effort includes stakeholders from several DOD agencies and a representative CRAF partner. And I imagine there's a lot more going on behind closed doors with this deal too that they'll never be able to speak about publicly. But for me, this is probably the biggest vote of confidence you could ask for in any crypto project. So yes, the DOD will be running multiple state channels, which, as we know, means buying and locking up DAG. So next up, we have Alkimi and their ads token. Now, these guys are working on solving a multi-billion-dollar problem in the digital advertising and real-time bidding world. They are building a decentralized advertising exchange that honestly just wouldn't be possible on any traditional blockchain. There'd be too many transactions, it would be too slow and extremely expensive on the pay-for-transaction model. So their white paper says that they'll be running a state channel for, quote, facilitating a programmatic exchange that will provide cost savings and fraud prevention for all stakeholders in the advertising industry. Users exposed to digital advertising, publishers that host advertising, and advertisers that buy digital media. Now, even though we think of an industry like digital advertising as super high tech, it actually has huge systemic problems. And that leads to situations where advertisers are spending millions on ads, but they're getting nowhere near the number of impressions that they're actually paying for. And the publishers, the people who are showing their ads on websites and other online properties, they're not getting anywhere near the amount they should be paid from the people who are buying the ads. And then, of course, stuck in the middle, we've got the poor users who don't benefit from any of this and just get tons of intrusive ads, repetitive ads, irrelevant ads, and they're just left with a browsing and online experience that really is just getting worse and worse every single year. Alkimi are aiming to fix all of this using the Hypergraph, giving everyone complete transparency and auditability in terms of what's happening with digital ad campaigns. This should make everything much more profitable for both advertisers and the media owners, while also giving users a way to actually benefit from online ads as well by earning a piece of the revenue. The ads token on the Alkimi State channel makes this possible, and I will be doing a full deep dive video into Alkimi soon because I think their idea and their business model is super intriguing. Thirdly, we've got Lattice, a decentralized exchange, and the LTX token. This was one of the first projects to launch on the Hypergraph, and you can think of Lattice as basically the next evolution of decentralized exchanges and DeFi, because along with all the DEX features that we're used to, they'll also be offering cross-chain swaps of native assets with near zero fees. Building on the Hypergraph allows Lattice to solve most of the common issues we see with decentralized exchanges: speed, scalability, and costs. And this passage from their white paper sums it up. Lattice aims to overcome the weaknesses of current DeFi applications with thicker liquidity, institutional grade AMM algorithms, and ultimately faster and cheaper settlement due to the use of Constellation's Hypergraph transfer protocol. Lattice will thereby bring institutional grade reliability and usability to the DeFi ecosystem. Lattice also acts as a launchpad for the Constellation ecosystem, and it's going to be where new projects using Hypergraph get their start. So anyone that holds Lattice tokens will get an allocation for these new launches on the launchpad. I like the tokenomics for LTX. It has a low market cap and a cap supply. There is a burn mechanism too. And if Hypergraph takes off and Lattice is in fact the primary decentralized exchange for the ecosystem, which it looks like it will be, then if it gets to an equal market cap of lead indexes in any other ecosystem, then it's going to do very, very well. And Lattice is something that I've actually been accumulating pretty heavily over the last few weeks as well. Lastly, that remember, Lattice is designed to offer cross-chain swaps of native assets, which are almost zero fee. So it should prove to be very popular, even with people that don't have an interest in Constellation or DAG. Next up, use case number 4 is GeoJam and the Jam token. Now, this is a decentralized social media platform for music that allows fans to earn in a rewards-based economy. And they can earn by engaging with their favorite creators, playing and sharing their music. And it basically incentivizes and gamifies back and forth communication and interaction between creators and their biggest fans. Now on GeoJam, what you can do is earn rewards points, which will actually be a layer 0 token on the Hypergraph, the Jam token, that give you access to exclusive experiences with creators and musicians that you really like, things that just cannot be purchased elsewhere in the real world. This is actually already a very successful app with tens of thousands of fans as users and some really high-profile creators such as Mariah Carey and Machine Gun Kelly. Now, what these guys are doing is basically just moving the entire business onto the Hypergraph. There's going to be so many transactions happening on this thing that the scalability and the zero fees is going to be a huge win for them. So it's a win for the fans getting access to exclusive experiences, and it also gives creators a new revenue stream that they can monetize as well. A pretty cool feature of GeoJam is the fact that they're taking principles from DeFi, staking, pooling, governance principles, and they're setting up systems that allow users to basically make proposals and vote on different experiences and different things that their favorite creators could make available on the platform. Users vote, and then if creators follow through and deliver, then they can earn revenue. Next up is DoubleDice and the DODI token. Now, these guys are tackling a massive market, which is the online gaming, gambling, and sports betting market. Now, they're building a decentralized betting system where you can basically bet on anything. Obviously, this is a huge industry, and there are a lot of issues with fraud, trust, fairness, and things like that. And the Hypergraph is going to allow them to solve all of that. The white paper describes the platform as a player-only environment without going against a house or a casino. Primarily, DoubleDice will be a trailblazer in a decentralized gaming space, giving the users total privacy and self-sovereignty while increasing fairness in the gaming space. So essentially, they're taking the house edge out of betting and gambling, letting the players just play against each other, and making sure that rewards do actually reflect the probabilities of any one outcome happening. Lastly, users can actually open their own betting rooms, which I think is a pretty cool idea. They can be branded, and you can basically choose exactly what kinds of games you want to bet or offer to friends, family, your community, etc. And as I said earlier, there are many other state channel businesses being built right now on the Hypergraph. Many of them are going through the Constellation Flight program, which is their accelerator, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what else comes out of that later in 2022 when Mainnet 2.0 launches. Now, hopefully that gives you a very brief overview of why I'm so excited for Constellation Network and the Hypergraph. I will be making a lot more content on this ecosystem as things develop, so make sure you keep an eye out for that. And if you want to learn more about crypto passive income, including seeing the breakdown of my full passive income portfolio for 2022, you can do that by watching the video on screen right now. Thanks for watching.